Have you ever wondered what could be done not just to protect elephants, but also to enable elephants and people live together in harmony? Then you will really enjoy today's episode, where we have Dr. Michelle Henley from Elephants Alive. She will share with us how her lifelong passion for elephants eventually led her to co-found a charity.
I think for any child seeing an elephant real life for the first time, it's something that sticks in your mind, and in my case really inspired me to study for that longer period to be able to work with them. And also, realizing that this is a challenge to share our beautiful planet with a species as big as an elephant that competes with the same resources as us.
She will share the mission of Elephants Alive along with some of the concrete projects.
Our mission is to promote the survival of elephants and also their habitat. So we're not only focused on elephants, but the spaces they occupy. And very importantly, to ensure harmonious coexistence between elephants and people.
And she will share with us why collaboration is key.
They touch economics, ecology, climate change, all these things. And because these are big problems, which they call wicked problems, you need a transdisciplinary approach to try and solve some of these problems. You can't go it on your own. And that's why I think this connecting and collaboration is absolutely vital.
Hello and welcome to the Impactful Ninja Show. I'm your host, Dennis Kamprad, and today we are joined by Dr. Michelle Henley from Elephants Alive. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here.
Awesome. We're super happy having you as well. Now, before we go into your journey and the amazing work that you do, give us a brief introduction. What is Elephants Alive and what are you doing there?
So Elephants Alive is a South African-based NGO, and we actually work wherever the elephants lead us. So I really like that idea that our study site is defined by where elephants go. And our mission is to promote the survival of elephants and also their habitat. So we're not only focused on elephants, but the spaces they occupy. And very importantly, to ensure harmonious coexistence between elephants and people, because there's more and more conflict developing between the two species.
So basically helping elephants survive, but then also helping improve the habitats and all the area they live in at the same time.
And promote spaces where elephants and people need to share the landscape, and that's often outside of protected areas.
Oh, wow. That's super curious already, like going a little deeper. But let's go all the way back now. Before you started Elephants Alive, what were you doing?
So I always knew since I was 5 years old that I want to work in nature and be immersed in nature and be protecting our wonderful surroundings. And so I went on a journey to qualify myself, because at the time that I wanted to enter the conservation world, it wasn't a popular career for women to be in. And I knew for me to occupy that space, I had to really qualify myself in ecology, because I love the connection between species and the whole environment, which is what ecology offers. And so I went to university to study for 12 years to get a doctor's degree, and to really develop my interest with elephants. And that's how the journey actually started.
Oh, wow. That's quite a deep passion from a young age. And then really basically learning all about it and doing the doctors. 12 years is quite a long university career as well.
Yes, it is. And I think because elephants are very social animals, I knew I wanted to focus on a social species. So for me, it would have either been primates, mongoose, because they're very social animals, or elephants. But within our family, we've always had a very deep passion for elephants. So in a way, I knew elephants were going to win in the end, and I've never regretted that.
So was the deep passion that you had for elephants just kind of being close to them when you were growing up and being fascinated by the elements, or did it also grow based on some issues that you saw and that you wanted to overcome with your work?
It's probably a combination of those. So, I mean, as a typical South African family, we regularly went to the Kruger National Park. I think for any child seeing an elephant real life for the first time, it's something that sticks in your mind. And in my case, really inspired me to study for that longer period to be able to work with them. And also, realizing that this is a challenge to share our beautiful planet with a species as big as an elephant that competes with the same resources as us. They're going to need people to, in a way, back them up and study them. So put the science on the table, but also the passion and the privilege that we have to share this world with elephants. So I knew it was going to be a challenge, but I've always felt a real connection to elephants because they're such compassionate species. They're empathetic with each other and they do amazing things for the ecosystem. So once I made up that decision, when I was about 16 years old, I started working towards that point.
Oh, wow. And let's fast forward from when you were 16 years old to once you finished your studies and also your doctor. Did you directly afterwards go into the field and say, like, well, let's start a charity to help elephants. Let's start Elephants Alive. Or did you take any intermediate steps until that point?
So there were intermediate steps. My mother is an artist. So in 1996, we started drawing elephant ear patterns. You know, after as a family, we read Ian Douglas Hamilton's books, Jane Goodall books, Diane Fossey's books. And I knew this was the life that I wanted to live, protecting animals, but with a scientific background and also that keen observation sense and living on the ground with that species. So being in their same habitat. And for fun, my mother and I started drawing elephant ear patterns to recognize individuals. And we sort of became addicted to that. So because it's like a bit of a bush soap opera when you can start understanding the social dynamics of elephants because you can identify different individuals. And so it was fun to see if particular elephants would meet up with other elephants at certain times. And at the same time that this was happening, I was busy doing my field work for my PhD, which was looking at the feeding distinctions between bulls and cows and how they feed differently based on body size differences. And during that period, the founder of Elephants Alive, Marlene McKay, she was also one of the landowners in the study area that I was working. And she got to speak to Ian about these ear patterns that my mother and I had generated. And when Ian Douglas Hamilton, who also had done a long-term study on individually recognizing the Manyara population, when he saw the ear patterns, he basically encouraged Marlene to contact me and to start an elephant project in the Timbavati Private Nature Reserve. So that's where it all began. It was my passion together with my mother, who also loves elephants and who is an artist, that converged with the founder, Marlene McKay's interest in the work that we were doing together with Ian Douglas Hamilton. And that's where the NGO was born.
Oh, wow. It seems like basically from the beginning, a journey that was all leading up to professionally helping elephants and their surroundings. One question for the funding part. So you mentioned you started a project together with the other two people. Was that like the concrete first step also in getting Elephants Alive started? And the other two people, are they your co-founders for this charity?
Yes, so they're the founders and I'm the co-founder because Marlene McKay had this vision of growing up with a little elephant and playing with a little elephant when she was a child. So she knew she had a connection with elephants. And then when she saw me present my PhD results at a Timbavati committee meeting, because she was on the committee, she contacted Ian and then they reached out to me and said, let's birth this project now. And that's where it all started. So that basically we started out where I kept on identifying elephants. Ian and Marlene fitted collars to elephants, tracking collars to elephants in 1998. So we've been tracking elephants for 25 years and the ID study of identifying elephants has actually been going for 27 years.
And when you say the first project that you did together, how did you get that one off ground? How did you get started there? And did you already reach out to other people to support your charity at this point in time, or did that just happen afterwards?
So Marlene McKay managed to build a tiny little office and gave us the first vehicle that we could use to do our field work. And Ian, obviously with Save the Elephants, having all those years of experience of tracking elephants, was the advisor, the scientific advisor on how we would take things forward. But you know, I obviously had to fundraise to keep the charity going. And also we started to develop different projects that weren't just based on tracking elephants and identifying elephants. So I started getting, you know, once I was qualified with my PhD, I could start getting students involved. And for instance, Robin Cook, who's been with us now for 10 years, I started a project where we used bees to protect iconic trees because in South Africa, that's quite a burning conservation issue. And so we've also done more projects where we reach out to the community because, as I said in our mission statement, we're very interested in fostering coexistence values between people and elephants. And in South Africa, there's a lot of communities that live outside of protected areas. And it's really important to engage with those communities and work together with them so that the value of these protected areas can be elevated. And also, as most elephants actually live outside of protected areas. So 57% of elephants live outside of protected areas. And 76% of elephants in Africa actually move across national boundaries, so between countries. I knew that when embarking on this elephant journey, we weren't just going to be staying within South Africa. And as soon as we saw elephants moving between protected areas, a whole new project was birthed, which is the Corridor Project, which is protecting these vital linkages between protected areas so that, and in those corridor areas, it's really important to foster coexistence values with people because often their crops are affected by people. But having these corridors linking protected areas, you allow elephants their freedom to move over the bigger areas that they need to. And at the same time, protect people's livelihood and safety in the process, because this is vital for biodiversity.
There's quite a few things that you already mentioned on your journey. So basically, when you started 25 years ago, initially you were just tracking elephants, then you developed with more and more projects until helping elephants in, cross countries and with these corridors as well. If you had to kind of give like a brief journey how Elephants Alive developed in the last 25 years, how did it go roughly?
Well, it sort of grew organically, like most NGOs do that are founded on a lot of raw passion. But what I really like about working in the NGO space is that this opportunity to let the animal, because of your familiarity and working on the ground, let the animal define where you should be focusing your attention or what you should be focusing your attention on. And so if I can speak about another project that's really close to my heart that also developed organically, was an incident with one of my staff members where we had an elephant that we have followed for many years, so over 20 years. His name was Matambu, and he actually ended up becoming blind in the latter part of his life. I think because he was blind, he really maybe had a different perception about us as observers compared to the other elephants. So he would contact rumble when he heard our vehicle coming and walk over as if he acknowledged us as one of his companions. And this became very touching and emotive to everybody working for Elephants Alive. And at one stage, he developed a very severe injury. So we're not sure if he got into a fight with another bull, but we had to treat him with the vets. So we got permission from the reserves to keep on treating him so that he could recover. And in that process, one of my staff members went home to their village, and they said they spoke to their grandmother about how concerned they were about Matambu the elephant, to their mother. And their mother was so concerned about this elephant, even though she had never met Matambu, even though she very rarely had got into the protected areas. Because of our electric fences and our separation of wildlife and people, often people that live on the borders of these protected areas, even though they're 16 kilometers away from visiting the park, they don't have transport or they don't have the funds to enjoy that part of wildlife. So when Joel came back and he mentioned how his mother was asking him every day how this elephant's recovering, it just ignited something in my heart that we need to bring grandmothers and mothers from the community and introduce them to elephants. And that was the birthing place of the Lawful Gogo program, which means elephant grandmother. And when you bring these gracious, beautiful women into the conservation space and you introduce them to breeding herds of elephants where you also see the oldest elephant leading the family, the matriarch, it immediately resonates with them. So they can immediately see the leadership role that female elephant has within her family and all the responsibility. Because culturally, these grandmothers or gogos are the backbone of society. They're left to look after the grandchildren. And on average, they have 8 grandchildren, sometimes up to 25 grandchildren. So by reigniting that conservation passion in the grandmothers, you immediately have a ripple effect in terms of your conservation value to the community. So we've invested quite a lot in the Lawful Gogo program, and it's really a very important program, I think, because it's connecting people to elephants across boundaries. So if that's an electric fence, if it's a political boundary, and that's what we stand for. So that's just one of the projects that have morphed into something quite big from one particular incident that can be traced back to a blind elephant bull called Matambu.
That's a very, very touching story, starting with a blind elephant. And then really, as you mentioned before, and let the elephant guide your actions, taking into account like basically all the effects it had on not just the elephants and how they behave with you, but then also on the community, and in the end, helping you to get the community much, much more closely involved.
Yes. And that particular bull, I remember when we took one grandmother on our tracking day, and we also camped with the grandmothers in the bush. There was a granny that was almost blind, and we were explaining to her that this bull is also almost blind, and she was straining to look at him, and then because he's blind, he walked into a tree when he crossed the road, and she was so startled and affected by that. And she could see an elephant through different lenses, so to speak, because she could identify with that elephant. And that's the same with these wonderful grandmothers who have all the knowledge of the medicinal plant values that are out there. They know how to live with the land. The primary educators of the next generation. And so I just feel inspiring these grandmothers is critical in terms of letting it have a ripple effect throughout the community to foster those values of living close to nature and in harmony, because a lot of that sadly is being lost as people urbanize, and also as culture changes and cultural values change. I don't think the youth sit at the feet of the grandmothers anymore and listen to their stories. It's much easier to look at your YouTube, but a lot is lost in that process. And I think connecting grandmothers and grandchildren to traditional values where you live close to the earth is really important for conservation today, because in that interface where elephants are protecting or connecting protected areas along corridors, that's where we need to maintain these values. If those corridors become urbanized, then all that connectivity across a larger landscape is lost. And at the end of the day, elephants won't enjoy the freedom that they're entitled to.
Sounds also you have like a very, very unique approach and how you're doing these projects and how you're helping elephants in the community, based on the one hand with your scientific background, but on the other hand, also having a really close look and letting yourself guide by the communities, by the animals. It's kind of this classical, like the art and the science of, doing something in this case.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I do think that science has a lot of answers, but it doesn't have all the answers. I think you need a lot of heart when you're dealing with two species that are very powerful. Elephants are powerful because they're so big and they've got big appetites and they need to cover a large area of land. And obviously we know how powerful humans are. And if you look at their history, elephants have declined in the past 100 years by 97%, approximately 97%. And over that same time period, we have increased by 387%. So elephants naturally are being compressed and kept into smaller and smaller areas of land. And it's only goodwill that's going to allow us to coexist peacefully. And that to me is more a philosophical endeavor than what it is a scientific endeavor. And, if you look at the African culture that's known as Ubuntu, it's that respect that you have for everything around you. In other words, it's a realization that I am because you are. And I think if that starts working both ways between elephants and people, then we'll be moving together in this harmonious space, which is really very critical to conservation today.
Wow. Let's take a quick step back into basically how you manage to make it all work. When it comes to charities, one of the big part is also the fundraising part, to continue operating, to continue helping elephants, in this case, helping society with the protection of elephants and with the inclusion of, everyone around them as well. When it comes to the journey of fundraising for your organization, how did you get started here at the very beginning to spread the word, and how did you progress there over time?
Fundraising is critical. You can have a lot of passion, but you do need the money to execute the dream. And this is where the funders come in, and we're very grateful. So I started learning and teaching myself, sometimes through hard experience, to write funding grants that I could send off to organizations like the US Fish and Wildlife Services, the Oak Foundation, Elephant Crisis Fund. So organizations that can understand the long-term vision and not just provide short-term funding, because it's also important, especially when you're dealing with communities, to have continuity in your funding. You can't, for instance, go and address the safety issues of people living in a corridor where elephants are crop raiding their food, or they may be scared to walk around at night, just for 1 year and then you disappear. You have to consistently be there to show that you care. It's almost like, like in an elephant family, the safety of the younger elephants are maintained by lifelong bonds. And I think when you're dealing with a community, you need to consistently for multiple years show that you care, and you need multiple funding then. So I've worked really hard to learn how to fundraise. I didn't study it. And that was probably one of the most important skills that I've learned in this journey, is to be able to fundraise. But also, I think there's a lot of goodwill in private people that it's actually very enriching to reward that passion that people have, that they want to contribute to a good cause. So, for instance, we do allow people to join us when we collar elephants, and it's life-changing for some people to be able to feel the hot breath of an elephant, or to hear it snoring while you're fitting a collar on, or to smell its breath like grated carrots, or whatever it is, to feel how hairy they actually are. And that's also been great, that we've had wonderful individuals that want to experience that and then will fund a collar, because the collars are very expensive to be able to track these elephants over a 4-year period if you're getting data every hour. But it's been a multiple approach, where having the big grants that support core funding, and then having the more individual people that are prepared to fund particular things where they can connect to elephants, or connect to large trees, or connect to bees, which we use to protect large trees, for instance. So there's many, or even to support grandmothers, because their portraits are so beautiful. When you've got, for instance, there's another NGO that we collaborate with, where it's taking unemployed youth in communities, and they come and take photographs of these interactions between grandmothers and elephants, and they're called Wild Shots Outreach. But it's connecting the dots, and that's, I think, as a life lesson, that's one of the biggest things that I've learned from elephants, who are my teachers, and that's that you are what you are because of your community, and because of the strength of all these dots that you connect. And that's why I think in terms of fundraising, unfortunately, I think some NGOs see funders from particular NGOs as competition, where I would rather like to see it as we all working together for good, and let's try and find the connections between us. And, one NGO, when you're dealing with complex issues that elephants unearth because they move over such large areas, you're dealing with wicked problems that you can only solve if we work together. Where one NGO might have a strength in terms of leveraging corporate funding, where another NGO might be good at leveraging grant money. But if we work together, then we can address the same issue, but from different angles. And I think more of that needs to happen in the conservation space.
So many beautiful points to unpack here as well. It's like on the one hand side, you're all working toward a good cause. You all wanted to change something for the positive. So it sounds like it's just natural to also work together, and instead of seeing yourself like other organizations as competition, to see each other as collaborators. And then when it comes to the funding itself, there's a big part on the funding for more like long-term projects, as happens with grants or with other organizations that help you. But then also there's the individual part. And I think there's quite a unique concept that you're having, or at least what you mentioned already, is that if I as an individual would like to support you, it's not just that I'm writing a blank check and I have no idea what happens, but I could support a specific cause, like a collar, or like one of the other things that you mentioned. That's a great transition also to, before we go a little deeper in some of the challenges as well on the way, for our viewers to have a look. Basically, if I wanted to support you, what would be my best way as an individual to support Elephants Alive and your work that you're doing?
Well, I mean, the first approach, and that's the classic approach, is basically following us on social media. So subscribing to our Facebook page and Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn so that you can see what we're doing and maybe get exposed to all the avenues in which you can support us, whether that's supporting a beehive project in Mozambique, in the corridors where elephants are moving because you know it's protecting people's crops, whether that's supporting elephant shepherds, which are people that we employ to inform the community that an elephant's going to crop raid and also frighten the elephants away at night in non-lethal ways, because that's important for people to protect their livelihoods. Or whether it's even another NGO that decides, okay, if I join hands with you and I write a grant together with you, then both of us have twice a better chance of actually securing that grant, and not just trying to always, as I said, see other NGOs as competition. Because I do believe, and this is what I find exciting about studying elephants, is elephants touch every single discipline. They touch economics, ecology, climate change, all these things. And because these are big problems, which they call wicked problems, you need a transdisciplinary approach to try and solve some of these problems. You can't go it on your own. And that's why I think this connecting and collaboration is absolutely vital when it comes to studying elephants. And I think we can achieve more, and we need to achieve more as a collective network of caring. So if there's an individual donor that wants to support us with funds or for a particular project, that's absolutely fantastic. But what they need to know, which I think is exciting, is they then become part of our herd, part of our family of people that are supporting elephants. They're not going to be alone in that mission, and we'll introduce them to the network that's supporting us.
That's beautiful. So it's basically two big buckets that I was hearing, like one for individuals. Please do follow on the socials, have a look what Elephants Alive are doing, the great work. We'll put all your socials into the show notes as well. Check out the website as well. Have a look which specific projects, for example, you would like to contribute to, or just in general. And then for organizations as well, when you think about the work that you're doing, the work that Elephants Alive is doing, you have one happy collaborator with Elephants Alive. And if you have some overlap with the work, I hear that you would be super happy to have organizations reaching out to you and seeing how you could collaborate towards a more positive impact that you could have together.
Fantastic, yes. And, to know that if somebody wants to support us financially, that we can explain to you how your contribution, however big or however small, how it fits into this network of good to help an amazing species that needs a lot of freedom if we want to protect and maintain the essence of what elephants are. And that is really large animals with a large appetite that need huge spaces. I mean, you can put an elephant in a zoo, but that is a poorer life for an elephant. We want to protect the values and the essence of elephants, wild elephants. And even if that means that we've got to link people in different countries, which is another exciting thing that elephants have done, they've actually introduced me to colleagues that we now have in Mozambique that I never knew existed. And it's just because I was following the elephants that I got introduced to all these amazing people that are also trying to make a difference on the ground. And I think if we follow the value system of elephants, we're going to make a better world, because they adore the young. They'll lay down their life for a young elephant. That's probably something that comes instinctively to the cows within family units. And they also revere the old. So in elephant society, the older you get, the more respected you are, because they've got a very long life of learning. So they're born with only 35% of their adult brain capacity, which means where most mammals are born with 99% of their adult brain capacity, which means they've got a long life in which they need to learn how to become an elephant. And they depend on older individuals within the social structure to teach them the way of becoming an elephant. And that's why we've also imitated that value system with our Lawful Gogo program. We believe these older grandmothers have the wisdom to teach us what are good morals. How should we look after the land if we wanted to produce food? Do we have to be frightened when we know an elephant is crossing that land at night and not meaning any harm, but just trying to move between protected areas? Those are all things that are captured in older people and also in elephant society. And I think we've got a lot to learn if we just mimic the value of elephants on a moral sense as well.
Beautiful. That's also a great transition already nearly to the next part about all the learnings that you took away and things that you can also share with us. Before we jump into that part, is there anything about Elephants Alive that you would have liked to talk that I didn't ask you or that you didn't get a chance yet?
No, not at this stage. Maybe something will come to me a bit later.
We could share it anyway in our show notes then. Now let's jump to the next part. When you reflect on all the work that you've been doing with elephants and with Elephants Alive, basically since you started as a kid, how has that impacted your personal life so far?
Well, a lot, because elephants are my life. So it's long hours often of dedication, but you don't count them because it's raw passions, and it's not a job. It's a calling. It's something you can't walk away from, even if there's challenges, because you've got to see it through. So I think that's one of the things, is that it's been a lifelong commitment for me. I mean, this is 27 years of actively doing research on elephants, but having a love for elephants basically since I was 5 years old, and knowing that I want to work with the social species. So I think it's that consistent connection with elephants that has steered my path in life. And I think every decision that I take, or every opportunity that I see, I always try and bring it back to elephants and how we can improve what elephants represent, because I feel that's an absolute privilege that in this day and age, where there's so much urbanization, where there's so much emphasis on economics and ambition and all those things, that we actually can share the planet with an animal like an elephant is almost a miracle, I would say.
I've seen them alive in Kenya when I was there, and it's just beautiful. Now, I just want to say I also deeply connect with what you shared just about that you're spending all your time thinking about and working for elephants, and it doesn't feel like work. It feels like a passion. It's quite similar to what I'm doing with Impactful Ninja as well. Like if all of this is like, let's enable more people to make a positive impact as well. And none of this so far has felt like work. So I really love that connection there as well.
Great. That's wonderful that you feel that, because I think, there's always long hours, there's always challenges, there's always obstacles, but if it's a calling, you don't look at that. You look at what you want to achieve, and actually the privilege that you have to try and unlock a wonderful cause in many people along, when you're walking this journey. I think that's very important.
And that's also the perfect transition to our final question. If you had to share one tip with our audience to become more impactful, what would that one tip be?
To stay inspired, to remain curious about how wonderful nature is, and to realize that if we don't succeed with protecting elephants, there's very little hope for all the other smaller, less charismatic animals that share the landscape with elephants. So I think to really connect to what elephants represent, not only for me as a scientist, but also on a philosophical level, and these values of Ubuntu, that we are because they are, and really hold that space of what a privilege it is to share the world with elephants today.
Beautiful. Well, Michelle, thanks so much for sharing your journey, sharing everything that you're doing with Elephants Alive. Wish you all the best and continued success. And thanks so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you. And I hope you'll come and visit us and we can spend some time in the company of these gentle giants.
I would love to. And to everyone else, thanks so much for joining us today as well. And stay impactful.